Sometimes it makes me want to cry when a patient tells me, all of my life I thought I was stupid because I couldn't keep up with other people. I never knew that I had a problem, a real problem that could be helped. Well, ADD is a real problem that can be helped.
Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, or ADHD, is a neurodevelopmental disorder as defined by the American Psychiatric Association in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM. ADHD is currently diagnosed in both children and adults based on the symptoms of inattention and hyperactivity or impulsivity. Two of several signs of inattention include making careless mistakes or having difficulty focusing. A few of the many signs of hyperactivity and impulsivity include fidgeting or restlessness, trouble sitting still, or interrupting and blurting out answers. While everyone does these things sometimes, not everyone has ADHD. An ADHD diagnosis requires at least 6 symptoms that are beyond what is age appropriate, that significantly impair multiple aspects of one's life, such as home, school, and work, that have persisted for at least 6 months, been present since before the age of 12, and can't be better explained by a different condition. Not everyone with ADHD has the same symptoms. In fact, ADHD diagnoses are separated into 3 presentations: primarily inattentive, primarily hyperactive or impulsive, and combined type. There are different levels of severity, and people with ADHD often have coexisting conditions, such as learning disabilities, anxiety, or depression. They can also be gifted. The term for this is twice exceptional. While there is no cure for ADHD, it is highly treatable. There is no single treatment that works for everyone with ADHD, but the current recommendation based on a ton of research is multimodal treatment. Medication to manage symptoms, and behavioral therapy to develop the skills and strategies necessary to minimize impairment. Those with ADHD often struggle with everyday tasks and are at a higher risk for negative life outcomes, such as divorce, job loss, accidents, and addiction. At the same time, many people with ADHD credit their success to the unique ways in which their brain works. ADHD symptoms such as impulsivity and distractibility can translate into creativity, curiosity, a willingness to take risks, and an ability to think outside the box. Fun fact, the name ADHD has only been around since 1987, but the condition itself has been described by physicians at least as early as 1798. So it's nothing new, and our understanding of ADHD is constantly evolving. What it is, what causes it, how it affects us, and how to address it. For example, you might hear many experts refer to it as an executive function disorder. And while this isn't listed in the current DSM, emotional dysregulation is also a well-researched aspect of ADHD. As we learn more and more about ADHD, the definition will definitely be updated in both the DSM and the ICD, which is the other major reference for medical definitions. Whatever we call it, and however we define it, those with ADHD experience its impact on many aspects of their lives.
Executive function is a set of cognitive or thinking skills that are responsible for the following: planning, organization, and prioritizing, initiating actions, self-inhibition, self-monitoring your behavior, being able to shift your attention between tasks, and working memory. That's a lot of stuff, so let's break it down. First, planning, organizing, and prioritizing. This involves any planning on a global level. It's not just planning a party. It's the ability to anticipate how long things will take or how much effort things will require, or thinking through multiple steps to see something that you want to do all the way through to the end. Problems in this area can look like being unprepared for something, even though you had adequate time or resources to do it. You may have trouble managing your time properly because you can't look at various pieces of information and easily tell what's the most important thing to pay attention to. So instead, you may spend your time frittering away at something that doesn't matter much while leaving the most important thing incomplete. Next, initiating actions. This involves taking action to get started with something. Anyone can put things off that they don't want to do, but trouble with initiation is at the root of procrastinating. It's like there's a block to being able to just do it. So if you have trouble in this area, you may need lots of pressure and prodding to get things done. So let's say you have a big project to complete, and that project is going to take a lot of work and a lot of planning. The person without trouble initiating will be motivated to get it out of the way so that they don't have to think about it anymore. The person who has trouble with initiation doesn't use this same kind of reasoning. They don't factor in the stress that it will cause having to do things at the last minute with not enough time. They can just still sit there and be immobilized and unable to start the project and put it off until the last minute. Self-inhibition. This can be thought of as impulse control. It's the ability to hold back from automatic responses because you're able to anticipate what impact your action will have. Trouble in this area can look like interrupting people or even making quick decisions or snap judgments. Self-monitoring. This skill is the ability to look at your behavior and measure your progress against what others expect of you or what's needed of you. If you have trouble in this area, you may tend to have no idea what you're doing and how it impacts others. You may have trouble accepting feedback from people because you don't see what the problem is. You don't see that you're consistently turning things in late or being late has a negative impact. In fact, you may forget that you're always late. And it's not that you don't remember that you were late. You don't remember that you have a pattern of being late or a pattern of being unreliable. Ability to shift between tasks. Some people refer to this skill as cognitive flexibility. This is a skill that involves being able to shift attention from one thing to another and also involves being able to respond and adapt to change. If you have trouble in this area, you may be considered to be rigid in your thinking, and you may be unable to deal with any kind of change from the way you think things should be or from what you were told. Or you could have serious trouble multitasking. The last skill is working memory. And this is the ability to keep things top of mind, to be able to retrieve and process recently learned information. And this skill is important for problem solving and decision making because with those mental processes, you need to be able to take the information that's in front of you and manipulate it in a way that helps you make a decision or solve a problem. So if you have trouble in this area, you can have trouble with problem solving and analytical thinking. Also, if you have inadequate working memory, you could have trouble making appropriate adjustments to your behavior because you're not taking into consideration factors that should affect your current decisions. For example, going back to the example of always being late, inadequate working memory plays a role in your inability to remember your pattern of always being late. It's like yesterday is forgotten and every day is just a new day. The control for your executive functions is located in the front part of your brain that includes the frontal lobes and other structures such as the basal ganglia, which are further down from the lobes. Executive function is also controlled by your prefrontal cortex, and this matters because that's where the stimulant medications work. There's many conditions that could impair your executive functioning, and some of these are depression and a traumatic brain injury. A traumatic brain injury occurs when you have an injury to your head that disrupts your brain tissue. Alcohol can also temporarily impair your executive functioning. And if you have a stroke that occurs in the frontal part of your brain, you can have trouble with some of these functions. I mentioned earlier that ADHD causes a lot of impairments in executive functioning. The stimulant medications like Ritalin and Adderall work to increase dopamine in the prefrontal cortex. But even with medication, many people are still left with difficulties managing some of these functions. And cognitive behavior therapy focuses on managing some of these executive skills.
A lot of people have the stereotypical thought about ADHD being a condition that only happens to little white boys. And they are just hyper, and that's all ADHD is. But then you go in there a little bit deeper and say, okay, yeah, ADHD does happen to adults, men and women. My love for space came from when my grandparents took me to Space Center Houston when I was a kid. I was like, okay, yay, more fun stuff to do during the summer. I go to space camp, and after a week, I tell my grandparents, like, I want to work at NASA. This is some cool stuff. And I would go every summer until I aged out. And it really stuck with me because at that time we were learning about the two rovers, Spirit and Opportunity. And I was just really jazzed about us being able to have the ability to leave this rock and go send something else to another rock and learn more about space.
You know, it affects people across age spectrum. So children, adolescents, youth, young adults. One thing that we do see, however, is that it doesn't actually come to attention until, it can be a functional issue. And that's when school starts. One thing to really be clear about is that ADHD, right, usually you're not going to see it develop in adulthood if the person didn't have any symptoms earlier.
My journey actually kind of possibly started when I went into college for as an undergrad. Because prior to that, I was living with my grandparents, and something that I now realize that happened every time was at the beginning of the school year, I always start off strong because I'm excited about learning a new thing. And then as the semester progressed, I just teeter off. After the fall semester of my second year, I wasn't performing like a PhD student. I was actually encouraged to go get tested. And after the testing, they came back with the results sometime later and told me that it was, like they said, moderate, severe, inattentive ADHD. And that prompted me to go start medical leave.
For children who present with mostly inattentiveness rather than the more hyperactivity or impulse control where they would be disruptive to a classroom. An inattentive child, right, that those are mostly their symptoms, they're just quietly not doing their work. Gaps that we see when it comes to gender and race are really from a healthcare perspective in that diagnosis and treatment. And that those are inequities that I believe that we have created in our own healthcare system, where we're not properly providing a timely diagnosis and treatment plan by a person's gender or race and ethnicity or their ability to access services. Black women live right at this intersection of gender and race. And so I think the easiest way to come through this is thinking about the inequities for ADHD diagnosis and treatment in both race and ethnicity, and then also for gender. Black women from even childhood in the schools can be missed as those disruptive behaviors are not attributed to something that needs to actually have medical attention, but something that needs to have disciplinary attention.
So after I got my diagnosis, I was trying to find as much as I can about being an adult with ADHD. At the time, the group was called Black Women with ADHD. And I joined the group. I do remember seeing that they have weekly Monday meetings. And I was like, okay, I might go to one. I go into the meeting and Renee is there.
Finally see y'all. Same here. I'm so glad you invited us. Look at that. You got a hard time.
We got
And then you're also Black. It can feel like two separate experiences that you're having simultaneously. So when I was out there looking to find out where are other Black people who are living with ADHD, so I can figure out how to reconcile some of my cultural experiences with having ADHD, and there was nothing. So I created the blog Black Girl Lost Keys to kind of put it out in the atmosphere, because I figured if I was looking for it, that there were other people looking for it too.
The meeting just started. I was trying to keep it all together, and then I couldn't. I just broke down and started crying. it felt like I had known them my whole life, because they actually understood what I was going through, and at the same time though, like, their personalities were just, it matched mine, and it made me feel really good to be around other people that understood.
When you get an ADHD diagnosis, it's confusing because the disorder isn't well understood. And then when you bring that into the context of being someone Black, there's all these community and cultural issues that a lot of people don't understand. And ADHD affects every area of your life.
Very good. There you go.
Please do not be afraid to get tested. If I had this diagnosis sooner, like even in college, that would have helped me out so much. And I didn't know where to go from here, because I honestly thought that I was doomed. I couldn't get a PhD. It's important to be around other Black women with ADHD so we can support each other.
How ADHD amplifies emotions. Your child drops his ice cream and explodes into an hours-long temper tantrum. Or your spouse can't find the remote and is suddenly screaming at no one in particular. ADHD impairs the ability to regulate feelings, anger, anxiety, sadness, or other. The result? Overblown, extremely emotional reactions to small setbacks or challenges. Why? The brain's amygdala region handles emotional reaction and decision-making. A flood of anger or worry tells the amygdala to relay a message to the cerebral cortex. In turn, the cerebral cortex then inhibits emotional response so you can take a deep breath and think things through. In ADHD brains, this connection is weak. That means a person with ADHD may have an emotional reaction that seems out of sync with its cause, struggle to calm down once an emotion has taken hold, seem insensitive to or unaware of the emotions of others. Joel Nigg, PhD, says, emotion regulation is a big part of ADHD that has been traditionally ignored. When comparing ADHD brains to those without, we see that the connection between the prefrontal cortex and the reward system has reduced activation, especially in the dorsal part of the prefrontal cortex. This could explain overexcitement, frustration and anger, and inability to respond to delayed rewards.
We have these 5 brain regions. Who cares? What does it mean, right? The fact that we can pinpoint in the brain what might be giving rise to these symptoms, does that help us understand this disorder any better? Or does it just make us feel better because we can point to biology rather than sociology as the cause of ADHD? Well, let me explain why, if you understand what these networks do, you can start to understand ADHD a heck of a lot better. And one of the foremost ideas that people need to understand, and it's displayed beautifully here in this particular paper, this is the organization of the cortex. And what you see here is a front to back, rostral to caudal, top-down organization of the brain, which means that our thoughts, our highest plans, are located up here, and then these will be translated into smaller behavioral structures back in here. These will then be translated into the secondary motor zone and become the actions and gestures we actually execute. And those will project right on to the primary motor zone, which is located right in here, to actually create the muscle movements for that behavior. There is a top-down, front-to-back rostral caudal organization of the frontal cortex. The higher the level of thinking and planning, the more forward that is being done. The more molecular aspects of behavior, the sequences we will string together, are occurring further back. And the further back you go, the more minute and molecular the behavioral structures become. The further forward you go, the more hierarchically organized behavior becomes. We can see that here in a behavioral structure. This is taking money, going to the bank, and depositing the money in a safe deposit box. That is a higher order structure of behavior. But it can be broken down into the sequence you see on the left, and especially into two different structures of behavior that involve picking up the money and putting it in the box, and involve the actual opening and closing of the, of the locked box itself. Two separate overlapping hierarchies. And they are hierarchies because you can see here that we can split them, for some reason. We can see here that we can split them into their two behavioral sequences nested under the larger purpose, the goal. What are we trying to do? Then we translate it into its sub-goals. We translate those sub-goals into much smaller behavioral structures, and we execute those in a sequence. So, this ability to go from higher level to lower level behavior and to sequence it properly is a function of the prefrontal lobe. This is why we have it. This is what it does. If you want to think of something even bigger, plan a wedding. Break that one down into its substructures, and then it's to its nested, even more molecular activities, all the way down to picking up the phone, calling the minister, then lining up the florist, then lining up the church, then lining up the invitations and the printer, and so on. And underneath each of those is going to be a whole series of even smaller actions and gestures, all building toward the culmination of a future goal. If you understand that, you now know why you have a frontal lobe. It's also illustrated here. I'm not going to spend much time on it because we've already discussed it, but the higher goals are retained at the foremost part of the frontal lobe. They will then be translated into their substructures, and those are translated even further back as we move into the more minute actions that we do. What does this mean for ADHD? It means you cannot organize behavior, as well as other people, into these larger, hierarchically organized, and temporally sequenced structures. Individuals with ADHD will find themselves able to engage in a couple of the minor sequences, but the structure is lost, the goal is shattered, the behavior is not fully executed, and the goal is either not attained or poorly attained, because one cannot organize, one cannot glue together all of these substructures to attain these higher level functions. And this is where you get your short attention span. The short attention span is simply the fact that you can engage in these smaller structures, but you can't organize them into those larger and larger goals and be able to protect it and sustain it and carry it forward until the goal is done. So understanding the neuroanatomy of ADHD helps us to understand the behavioral symptoms of ADHD and this inability to hierarchically organize long chains of behavior to accomplish our goals. We can now define ADHD as a disorder of persistence toward the future, which is also deeply affected by a failure to resist distraction. The individual cannot help responding to irrelevant events that lie outside of these behavioral structures, and the structure falls apart. Because the moment you are trying to engage the sequence, something else irrelevant happens, and you are responding to that. And the goal is lost, the sequence fails, and now you've only done part of the task and failed to engage the entire task. So we can now say that this is not an attention disorder. This is a problem with persistence toward the future, with the ability to hierarchically organize behavior into ever larger structures to accomplish the principal goals of our lives, the important things that lie ahead in the future, in time. That instead, you will have marked difficulties resisting distractions, and that will shatter this working memory function as we've described it, this hierarchy of behavior, and now you are skipping from one incompleted sequence to another. Hence the short attention span and the marked distractibility. And even when distracted, the patient with ADHD is going to find it very difficult to re-engage the uncompleted task or goal because they can't hold all of this in mind anymore. Once the distraction occurs, working memory, which is up here, is shattered, the goal is lost and the person is off to the races. Whatever else happens in the moment will be more compelling than the goal they had held in mind. So patients with ADHD will not re-engage in completed activities the way other people would have done had they been interrupted and had to deal with a compelling distraction. Other people get back to work, finish the task, see the goal to its final completion. The patient with ADHD is far less likely to do so. Now, that is a function of working memory, as I have said, which suggests that ADHD is not an attention disorder. It's a disorder of at least working memory. And since working memory, as we will show, is one of the major executive abilities, it implies that the other executive abilities must be at risk also, which therefore means that ADHD, especially in adults, is an executive function disorder, not an attention deficit disorder. Now, DSM-5 will not change the name no matter how much you plead with them, even though we know that ADHD is a misnomer. And we know that it trivializes these profound impairments in these relatively unique human abilities. And the reason we will not do so is for a very good reason. The term ADHD now appears in both of our countries in laws, regulations, entitlements, and protections, especially in the United States. And if you rename a disorder, you have just disenfranchised these individuals from those hard-won protections and entitlements. So we won't rename the disorder, if only because of legal-political reasons, even though the science is telling us that the name is inappropriate, if not trivial. In fact, I think that the name is part of our problem in convincing the public that there is a real disorder here, because attention deficit really does sound rather banal, doesn't it? I mean, just go to Starbucks, have a coffee, get some caffeine, would you? We got serious disorders to contend with. I mean, bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, major depression. Now, those sound impressive. But ADHD, get out of here, you know? We got serious mental disorders to deal with. But if you were to rephrase ADHD as executive function deficit disorder, and if you know that the executive system exists to organize behavior across time, to allow you to self-regulate toward that future, you could call ADHD either EFDD or SRDD, self-regulation deficit disorder. Now that's an impressive name, because it speaks to something uniquely human, and that is self-regulation. So you need to know that regardless of what DSM-5 does with the name, and it will not change it, I can assure you of that, right, that we as patients, as clinicians, as family members need to understand that we have changed the nature of this disorder, that we now have a much better insight into what's going wrong, and it ain't attention. It's executive functioning.
A lot of people in the African American community choose not to get their children diagnosed based on some mistrust, and then also cultural stigma that is faced when, you know, they have a child who has been labeled as ADHD, and then the lack of awareness and education and fear of just the medication and what that means you know, when you have a child who has ADHD. There's a huge bias in the African American community when it comes to just referring kids to be diagnosed. One of the things that we do find is that because parents in the African American community, we want more for our children's behavior to be normalized. And so when we refer to the fidgeting, the hyperness, them, you know, inattentive ways and behaviors, what we say is that, oh, they're just being bad, you know, or they're being rebellious. And so the last thing that we would like to label is our child to be ADHD. So we just come up with normal ways, normal behaviors to kind of normalize that. So definitely bias in referral, and especially just to piggyback on like in the educational system, what I find is that when parents are going to the teachers and saying, well, that's just his behavior, well, then the teachers are probably more prone to be biased, prejudgmental towards, okay, it might not be something wrong with that child. I might have to buy into what the parent is saying about the child just being bad, and so then that changes their whole perception of the child. Then we start looking at assessments and we start working on clinical interviews and just trying to figure out, okay, what is going on? So just trying to get to the root of the problem of where everything is stemming from, such as the anger, even if they are in a violent situation, when they come into the counseling center, those are things that they can feel safe about talking about. And so then we link with other psychiatrists or other psychologists in the community and say, hey, we got a kid who we have completed some screenings on, who definitely kind of show some signs of ADHD, and so can we send them over to you? And then we get the parents to pretty much buy into, hey, look, we did an assessment, this is what this looked like, and here's how we can try to help your child educational wise. And then not only that, but we're educating the community, the parent, about some of the symptoms, and then they can take it back home, because we don't only educate, we teach them different ways to kind of help, and then we link them up with another provider. And so we all become like an integrated team together. So now you have the school system, you have the counseling portion of it, and then you also have the parents and the child all involved on the same team. Also, one of the things that I really love about the DSM-5 this time is the CFI, the cultural formulation interview that they incorporated in this one, that really helps a lot with understanding where that family comes from, what are some barriers, what would prevent them from getting intervention, and so it takes the therapist into a different stage of, okay, let me, from this cultural formulation interview, let me kind of look at it and go, how can I help this family? How can I be a resource to this family? Let me forget about what I know of, from a medical perspective or from a therapeutic perspective. Let me just put all that to the side and let me just kind of focus on this family right here. And based on what they just told me from their culture and any cultural barriers that may exist, how can we go around to making sure that they get the assistance that they need? If a child already has heard these things as far as they're bad, they have negative behavior, they make bad choices themselves, sometimes they kind of adapt to that. And so sometimes they do make it, because if that's the only way that they can get attention, then that's exactly what they do. So you'll find that more in boys. They'll say, well, everybody else tell me I'm bad, so I'm gonna just be bad, in the African American boys. And what I try to kind of just impose on them is that you're not bad. You're making bad decisions, and so we have to figure out how to make the best decisions, So just changing the words, that's one of the things. Another thing is that remembering, sometimes it's the role reversal. Young men in the African American community, if they live with single parents, then they're already taught that they need to be the head of the household. And so it can start at any age. So you could have a 4-year-old who have been saying, you're going to take the trash because you're the man of the house. And so that's a role reversal. Now you've went from being a child to already being an adult taking care of the household. And so when you get to school, you think you the man of the house at home. So guess what? You're going to think you're the man of school, of the classroom. And so that's one of the things that you'll find, is because these are some things that have been embedded in you. Stand up straight. You have to act like a man. You have to think like a man. You have to talk like a man. And then it's always instilled in the African American male. We have to. They have to think about the perception of others. So you have to talk straight, walk straight, and then that can become rebellious. And those can be signs of kids who are struggling with it. And then that can give them defense mechanism, that can show signs of oppositional defiant disorder, because they haven't even been able to be a kid. And so now here they are, 10, and they have been taught that they are the man of this household and they have to act like a man. And so I think those are some of the symptoms that you would find in kids who have ADHD, but that might not be in the screenings or in the DSM, those outside factors that influence that behavior. If the child is being diagnosed with ADHD, or if it's an adult who's being diagnosed with ADHD, building that relationship to understand who's all a support system for that particular client is huge in the African American community. So starting where they are and then recognizing the support systems that they have, I believe that the client will have a better outcome. The treatment plan will be more effective if those two things are done in the very beginning, and then we can alleviate a lot of the things as far as inaccurate diagnosis, missing appointments, stopping treatment. I think those can actually be alleviated if those two things are looked at first.
Exactly the same ADHD presentation and severity of symptoms as the next person, and still have a very different lived experience of ADHD. Some of the factors that create those differences in our experience are individual, like me having a brother with more severe challenges led to mine not being taken seriously. Some factors are related to gender or comorbidities such as learning disabilities, anxiety, or depression. And there are cultural factors as well, like being Black.
Being Black and having ADHD, there's several different layers we battle. One of them is our own community, and in my case, is my own family. Unfortunately, I was very much abused by my parents. So where a lot of ADHD people will talk about people calling them stupid or weird or dumb, for me, that was my house. That was where it came from.
People say, why do you have to make it about race? Just like there's nothing that my neurodiversity doesn't affect in my life, there's nothing that my race doesn't affect in my life. Whether it's a positive effect or a negative effect, it's just all part of who I am. I bring that experience to everything that I touch.
Call me Dia Najah. I'm a special education teacher, and I'm also a printmaker and a mixed media artist.
I have ADHD, and I am an artist, and I help people develop their creativity.
I was first diagnosed when I was 24 or 25. When I was just starting out my career as a newscaster. I don't remember getting the information that made me feel like, oh, this is an emergency, So I literally went on about life, forgot about the ADHD diagnosis, literally forgot I had it.
My mental health journey started in April of 1992 after a suicide attempt. None of this was done as a cry for help. This was, I wanted the pain to be over. At that point, it was so many years of being told how worthless I am.
So I did battle depression way before I was diagnosed with ADHD. I have been in and out of psychiatric hospital, at least 10 times, 10 inpatient visits. I've been in daily outpatient. I've been in extended day treatment. I've spent a lot of time working on my mental health and getting to a place where I know what to do when I feel like I'm spiraling.
My son has ADHD, and he was diagnosed as a child in middle school about 7 years ago. But when you have to deal with all the trials and tribulations that your child has with ADHD, and especially being a Black boy, many of the things that happened for him when he was inattentive or didn't remember to turn in his homework, or if he was disruptive at all, he was just labeled a bad kid or a kid that wasn't smart, where that was not the case. So I had to do a lot of fighting to even get them to give him a test for ADHD. Dealing with all that, paperwork and things like that, I had no time for myself to try and get myself diagnosed. I got diagnosed in my 50s.
I can't speak for everybody, but the way intersectionality works is that I start to feel like, how many streets am I at the intersection of exactly? Black, woman, neurodivergent, queer.
I was searching one night on Google for the Black experience with ADHD, and there was nothing. And since there wasn't, I was like, well, somebody's got to talk about it.
People are like, oh, my therapist is Jesus. Jesus is my therapist. I'll go to church and pray about that. I can't speak to people who are in their 20s now, but traditionally in African American culture, mental health issues are just like, nope.
There's this stereotype of Black women. The assumption is that we're always strong, we always have it. Any challenge that there is, we can get around it. In some ways, it's used somewhat as a motivational thing, but I think far too often it sometimes results in us feeling like we can't tell people, hey, I am hurting right now. I need help.
Black people have had serious issues with the medical community. We've been experimented on. We've been given drugs that were supposed to be one thing and were really another. We've been subject to forced sterilization.
Coming from an environment in which behavioral issues at school or failing grades are not directly linked to a disability, the disciplinary response is going to be a lot different. And for me, that disciplinary response was very physical, was abusive.
As a culture, it's on us to fix ourselves. And you don't go to doctors for this. You don't go to therapists for this. The one blessing from when I woke up from the suicide attempt is I didn't want to take my life anymore. And so I knew that I needed to do something to not spiral. I had to go to the psych ward at the hospital. That was the most wonderful, peaceful time of my entire life, was in the psych ward. I didn't have to fake that I was okay. And there were people there to actually care. I'd never had that in my entire life. I'd never had someone tell me that my feelings were valid, even though they weren't the norm.
Even more than the average community, being neat, being tidy, keeping your appearance up, those things are important. You don't want to look scruffy or suspicious, right? That's what we were taught growing up, to keep us safe. So if you can't be neat and you look slovenly, it's like, oh, what will the white people think?
You learn very quickly to survive in a non-person of color's world, to be viewed even close to being equal, or at least to not be viewed as being ignorant or an animal. You need to speak the same vernacular. You need to use the same verbs. You need to use the same punctuation when typing messages to people as the non-people of color around you. But at the flip side, when you're around people of color, there's a certain way that we speak. The problem over the decades is one has been viewed as better and one has been viewed as worse.
So when I found out I had ADHD, and I met my friend Renee, we did a YouTube clip, and they watched it and they said, "You have ADHD?" Yes, I do. You didn't know this all this time that I have ADHD? So clearly I've been masking for a long time.
I think there's also some old school approaches to things in some Black communities, just of making sure you're also careful with your vulnerability. I think my parents maybe had good intentions for this. It's like, well, when you go to work, make sure you don't talk about these things because you don't want them to think that you're weak. You don't want them to think that you need more assistance than your colleagues do. Far too long, that kind of resulted in me silencing myself.
I've heard all the names. I've been called retarded, slow, Rain Man. And those are the nicer names.
If I get pulled over and I know to the best of my ability of me not quickly trying to text my wife going, where's the paperwork in the car? Because I don't know. Like, she has her car, I have my car. Right now, I have no idea what's in the glove compartment. I've not had a ticket since I was 18. I get stopped by cops. And my son, who we have 4 kids, he's the youngest. I know I have to have the talk with him. And most black men have it with their sons. You have a talk of how to, speaking of code switching, of how to present yourself when you ever encounter police.
You know, the impulsivity piece is what scares me the most. But what we do tell my son is, yes, keep your hands where they can see them. Do not be afraid. And, you know, if there's any kind of problem, we can handle it when you get home. And it's really difficult to have that conversation. And sometimes that conversation doesn't matter.
Earlier this week, I want to say it was Tuesday, I talked about how I was out running and I had a police cruiser coming towards me, intentionally slow down, go past me, U-turn, and follow me for about a block and a half until I stopped, middle of the street, turned around and looked dead at him. And then he drove off. I had 2 thoughts, and I'm just going to be very explicit about this. One was, my wife and kids know I love them. And that was hard. But that's what we deal with on a daily basis. And the other thought was, if he's going to kill me, he's going to have to look me in the eyes to do it. I'm not giving him my back. If he's going to kill me, you're not getting my back. You got to look me in the eye, human being to human being, and be okay with pulling a trigger, stepping on the gas, whatever you were going to do.
A conversation that's happening right now that's big is, are the police safe people for us to call if we're in the middle of a mental health crisis? And that's a terrifying question for Black Americans, because you can be in the middle of a mental health crisis. And however that looks for you, if it looks like screaming, yelling, expressing your pain, it could unfortunately result in your death if the police don't know how to handle that situation.
I had a therapist once tell me, oh, I'm shocked to see a Black person here because you guys have survived slavery. I've had therapists that the only analogies they felt they could use with me had to be basketball related. White female therapists have hit on me as a survivor of sexual abuse as a kid. That's a trigger. I remember telling my wife this last time I was looking, I said, if I don't find someone now, I don't know what happens.
There are so many things that we have to deal with on a daily basis. So there are those like microaggressions. You know, if somebody asks you, about your hair, or sometimes people assume that I'm a single mom, without even knowing. So you have those things that you're dealing with, and then you're dealing with, being able to like handle your job. If you have your executive functioning issues, are you able to disclose your ADHD or not? Because you're already sometimes looked at as somebody who might not be able to do what you're doing. So maybe you're lazy, or, you have to leave because your kid has, another IEP meeting.
When you have dark skin, you're a person of color, there's just so many stereotypes that people have that are just like in the media, and even not seeing people who look like you in high places. It's really hard to see yourself there too. And even when you get there, it's hard to stay there because people around you might put you down or say you don't deserve to be there.
We are kind of conditioned to just, take it and put it, compartmentalize it and then move on with your day, because it's what has happened for so long, and it gets really tiring and upsetting, and it's scary to have to live. It's exhausting to live that way, and we shouldn't have to.
If you're a Black person, you're dealing with mental health, it's one thing that you suffer in silence, and you suffer in silence with a lot of factors buried on you. It's another thing to be screaming your head off and no one hear you, because now I'm exhausted, vulnerable, hurt, and still no one heard me.
I think if I could make the world different, the main thing that I would want is for people to be able to see the humanity in each other, because in order for people to mistreat people and other them the way that they do, they have to dehumanize them.
I want a world where my daughter has support for her ADHD so that she can shine in the ways that she already does shine even brighter. I want a world where schools are funded in a way that's equitable.
I don't want any other women or people, and just in general, but specifically Black women or women of color, to have to just fumble around in the dark for so long, wondering what's wrong with them. I don't want people to feel like it's so embarrassing to think that, oh, I might be flaky because of this, or to hear all of the negativity associated with ADHD and reject that, even if that might be you, because you've been told you should feel another way about yourself, you know? I don't want another Black woman to feel like she has to deny everything about herself if she's struggling with this, that she should just seek help about it and talk about it, because there's ways to manage it.
I have to represent for my students because I have to let them know you have gifts and we have deficits. We have to lean into our gifts and accommodate for the challenges.
God not only made us this color, but he made our brains wired this way for a reason. And when you understand that, I think that that can be your magical power in this world, especially in this time, to understand what your strengths are and how you can show up in the world like that, understanding your strengths instead of fighting against things that you just aren't that good at anyway.
I'm not going to give up my ADHD for the world. Anybody comes and says, "Do you want to trade?" No.
The schools are going to tell you, the teachers are going to tell you, the world is going to tell you, you got to do better. Why are you doing it this way? What's wrong with you? Why do you think that way? And guess what? Because I am the person I am, and I think the way I think, I also have gifts within me that are uniquely me and no one else. And you have the same thing within you.
People with ADHD, the world needs your ear and your innovations right now.
There has to be room for every voice to be heard and for every person who needs a safe space to have one.
Prioritizing yourself is an absolutely okay thing to do. Making sure that you are as good as you can be. Is the best way that you can help others. I know being new to something, it can feel like if you don't have the answer, that people aren't going to listen. And this is especially big on the internet when people say, if you don't know what we're talking about, just don't participate in the conversation. Definitely don't shy away from participating in the conversation. Ask all the questions, get involved in any way you can. And there's definitely a community that's going to wrap their arms around you.
Don't let your potential discomfort prevent you from being able to reach in where you can.
I think the best thing we can all do is learn the historical context of this, because it's beyond policing. It's about, just there not being an equal playing ground from just the get-go, of this country. And that's been another thing that's kept Black people feeling a certain way. I have to work 3 times as hard to be half as successful or to appear half as smart. And that's even if I get the opportunity.
We need people to prioritize lifting voices of color in a community that desperately needs them more often than when it's a trending hashtag. We need it.
There's a lot of misconceptions and myths about ADHD, and unfortunately, these false beliefs perpetuate the stigma around the disorder. These myths are in no specific order. The first one is believing that we all have ADHD at some level. We all have it. This idea is a variant on the base belief that ADHD, which stands for Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, isn't a real illness. Instead, it's a focus problem that falls on a spectrum that affects everyone. Well, true, we can all struggle at times to pay attention if we have a lot going on or need to sustain attention for an extended period. But ADHD is so much more than trouble focusing. In fact, there are a lot of reasons that you can have trouble focusing and concentrating. Some of these reasons are not getting enough sleep, being run down for any reason, sick, working long hours, or being burned out. Also, anxiety interferes with focus and concentration. Illnesses like COVID can give you brain fog that makes it hard to focus and organize your thoughts. So all of those are things that can interfere with your focus. I said ADHD is more than a focus problem. People with ADHD also have trouble with motivation. Time management is huge. Organization, multitasking, and in some people there's emotional dysregulation. I talk about that in my video on symptoms that you can see in adults with ADHD. These symptoms, taken together, cause a lot of problems for people, such that the person with ADHD who doesn't get it addressed can flounder and underperform such that they never reach their full potential. Everyone isn't experiencing those consequences. So yes, there are lots of things that can distract us and make it hard to get things done, but no, everyone doesn't have the brain disorder of ADHD that most often leads to a lot of negative consequences for the people affected by it. Number 2, ADHD medication is a crutch. It's hard for me to talk about this one without getting upset. Medication isn't for everyone with ADHD. It is a double-edged sword because it comes with side effects that are intolerable for some people. But when it works, medication corrects or improves a disability and levels the playing field for the person with ADHD. The idea that medication gives people with ADHD superpowers goes back to the belief that it's not an illness, but a decision you make not to do the things expected of you, like you can turn it on and off at will. It is true that people with ADHD can hyper-focus on the things that they're interested in, but they can't control the things that they're interested in. You can wave $1 million in someone's face and say, you get this if you can just read these 10 books and summarize them this week. The money doesn't give them the power to push through and complete the task. If the content of the material doesn't resonate in a way that keeps their attention, they won't be able to complete the task. It just won't happen, even though they desperately want it to. So this hyper-focus interest thing is not just something that they pick and choose based on selfish interests. Also, the hyper-focus can be a bad thing because they can get locked into something and lose track of time, and therefore neglect other important obligations or be late to things, making people angry, or not completing assignments because they got lost in something while they were hyper-focused. I mentioned not taking medication because of side effects. This hyper-focus thing can happen in a negative way as a consequence of taking stimulants. You may have 5 things that you need to complete. You take your Adderall, and 6 hours later, you've done one thing. That one thing is fleshed out in a lot of detail that's probably overkill, but you've let some people down by not doing the other things. Number 3 myth: if you cared enough, you'd remember things. This is related to the concept of paying attention to the things that interest you and the assumption that you choose what interests you. People with ADHD can be extremely forgetful. Memory requires a certain amount of focus and attention to a subject to encode the information and then retrieve it later. If you don't attend to something long enough, it will not be encoded and you won't remember it. A good example of this is forgetting someone's name right after they said it. For example, let's say I walk up to you and introduce myself. You may see me and the first thought that comes to your mind is, her hair looks awfully thick. Can she get a comb through it? You may even imagine me struggling with it. If that's what's going on in your mind while I'm saying my name, you're not going to encode the information even though you heard it because your mind was occupied with other thoughts. This is how it can be all the time with someone with ADHD. Information goes in one ear and out the other, and only some of it gets retained. The things that get retained are not cherry-picked based on what you care about. Sometimes it's just random. But this can be a difficult thing for people close to you to accept, even though they understand it intellectually. And that's where you, as the person with ADHD, has to create a system that reminds you of the things that are important to other people for the sake of your relationships, job, or school. Number 4, accommodations give people with ADHD an unfair advantage. Most school accommodations are things like getting extra time to take tests or complete assignments. And there are other things like sitting near the front of the class or taking tests in a separate room. People who believe this myth are usually referring to the extra time. Hey, I have a concert I want to go to the night before an assignment is due. I want to get some extra time too. The extra time needed for the person with ADHD is because of the things that I mentioned before, like getting sucked into a hyper-focus hole, or having trouble organizing your time, or even reading and processing information slower. It can take you longer just to read and reread the questions on a test. The person without ADHD doesn't have these problems. If you need more time for a test because you're not prepared and don't know the information, that's a completely different issue from needing more time because you process the information slower. Number 5, people with ADHD aren't very smart. Things like needing more time for tests and assignments can make people pass this judgment. But if you have ADHD, you can even think this about yourself, especially if you're failing classes or struggling to finish work tasks that your coworkers don't have a problem finishing. In this setting, it's easy to think, what's wrong with me? I'm just not good at anything. But the information processing impairment that comes with ADHD is a completely separate entity from intellectual capacity. Think of it as a performance issue. You have a certain set of capabilities, but you stumble with the execution of things. I'll use myself as an example. You hear about people being able to read a book in a day. I could never read a book in a day. I can only stay focused so long before I forget what I read and have to go back and reread. So I have to read very slowly if I don't want to backtrack. Because of my slow reading, my 5th grade teacher told me, or told my parents, that I don't belong in advanced classes. Fortunately, my parents ignored that feedback and encouraged me to focus on the things that I was good at, like math and science. But if you don't have someone in your corner, this kind of rhetoric can seep into your soul and shape what you think about yourself, especially when it comes from an authoritative source or people whose opinions matter to you. Number 6, people with ADHD lack discipline and are lazy. It can look like laziness or lack of discipline from the outside, but on the inside, it's lack of adequate motivation. The motivation I'm talking about is a brain-derived motivation and not externally motivated. And what do I mean by that? I've heard it said, you're not motivated? You can't remember? Well, maybe if I pull out my belt, you'll get motivated. No. Punishment, shaming, and threats don't motivate. The threat of losing your job may motivate the person or get the person moving who lets their self-interest get in the way of getting their work done. But the person with ADHD has a brain that does not produce enough dopamine in the nerve circuits that control motivation and reward. I talk about that in detail in my video on motivation. I'll have that video linked at the end of this one and in the description. As for laziness, what seems like an easy task for the person without ADHD can seem monumental to the person with ADHD. The low motivation from low dopamine can make you feel completely inert, like you can't move. Inertia is defined as a property of matter where things at rest or remain in motion unless acted upon by an external force. With ADHD, you can't always access the force that changes your current state. You know you need to do this thing, but you're stuck in this mind space and just can't get out of it. And similarly, with the hyperfocus, you can be moving at 50 miles an hour on some task and you can't get out of the fast lane. You just have to keep going until something comes along that forces you out of it or you just run out of steam. So the inactivity here is involuntary. Last myth, number 7, is ADHD medication makes people with ADHD more likely to become addicts or drug seeking. This belief stems back to the idea that medication is unnecessary because ADHD isn't a real disorder that requires medication to correct it. It is true that stimulants are habit forming, but the addiction comes from the people who are taking them for performance enhancement and not to correct a neurodevelopmental brain disorder. Stimulants produce immediate results within minutes to an hour, and like other medications that produce these quick responses, like benzodiazepines, your body can become tolerant to the effects. So over time, the dose that you took becomes less effective and you need a higher dose to get the same effect. I usually encourage my patients to take breaks from the medication, like on the weekends or vacation if they can, because giving your body a break from it slows the tolerance process. But tolerance can happen with anyone and isn't proof that you're becoming addicted. Addiction happens when someone misuses the medication, like taking it around the clock to be on top of their game day and night. And this might be someone who's working 2 jobs and needs to be awake for 20 hours a day. But our bodies aren't meant to be awake for 20 hours a day. The current Adderall and Ritalin shortages perpetuate this myth. Adderall and Ritalin are Schedule II controlled substances in the same category of abuse potential as the opioids. Now, many of them are back-ordered, and some pharmacies, if you call them, won't tell you over the phone if they have it in stock. You then may have to drive around shopping from pharmacy to pharmacy to find one who has it. And all this secrecy about where you can get it and where you can't get it changes the tone and the vibe around taking stimulants and puts you into a drug-seeking mode, which is something associated with addiction. Technically, you are drug-seeking, but you're seeking the medication that's out of stock that you were prescribed to treat a condition.
You have 10 minutes, and when you're finished, please go ahead and turn them in on my desk. Dylan, you need to take your test.
Sometimes it's not just a distraction.
What is it like to have ADHD? If you would ask me that 4 years ago, I would have been like, I don't know, I guess running late. I don't know, flaky. I don't know. I would have given you the greatest hits. ADHD, greatest hit. The only way anyone can ever talk about what it's like to have ADHD is if they have ADHD BT and ADHD AT, before treatment and after treatment, because only then can you make a comparison. I can talk about, I think very specifically now, what my life was like before treating ADHD and what it's still like on the days that I'm not on guard or that I'm not medicated. And I'm just going to be straight up. Medication's not for everybody, but for me, it has been a blessing. My breaking point to getting my diagnosis was that I had started to just resign myself to the fact that some people just need taken care of. I really felt like I was that person that just needed to be taken care of financially. It's not because I don't like to work. I am the hardest working person ever. I've always worked. I've always worked multiple jobs just to pay the rent. It's a hard way to live. A friend of mine used to point out, you have 5 jobs and you still can't pay your bills. There's a problem here. Yeah, I know. Can you tell me? Tell me. I want to know. To be honest, guys, I could still use a financial caretaker. I know how to make money. I just don't know how to make money all the time. But I'm still here. This is what I wrote. I had lost hope that my life would change because I'd been in the same pattern of behavior since I entered the workforce in my early 20s. But, you know, upon further reflection, it was before I entered the workforce. It's just I had a good structure beneath me. So the only reasons that I wasn't struggling as much in college and high school was because of the structure, because I had schedule, and because I had, you know, very short-term goals, like, okay, get to the end of the semester. It was the short-term and the constant change of things that I didn't realize was like actually good for me. And then of course you get out into the workforce and it's all you. It is all you. You have to create the structure. You have to create the safety nets. You have to rebuild the scaffolding. And if you don't know you got to build scaffolding, you are still operating using the same coping mechanisms you've always used, and they fall apart pretty quickly. Okay, these are the symptoms that I struggled with the most. BT, before treatment, impulsivity in my behavior and my choices, jumping in headfirst on everything. For instance, when I was first married, I saw this couple running a teleprompter business. They owned their own teleprompter. And so my husband at the time, I was like, ooh, we could do that. And he bought the teleprompter, very expensive like $1,400 or something. And of course, I kind of lost interest in it when I figured out how hard it was, and it was like totally boring. He never let me live that one down. Really poor at planning ahead, really poor at planning for the long term, really poor at planning for my future, even the fun stuff. I take trips kind of not spur of the moment, but it's like, I haven't been home in about a year. I'm gonna go home in 2 weeks. Planning for my future, I've thought about it, just haven't figured out how to do it. The makeup artist was giving up her kit. She sold the whole thing to me. Like, I just had a fully stocked kit. I worked on one film and I'm like, no way. I like the tactile part of putting makeup on people's faces, but I never gained the full confidence that I was doing it right. I did a few celebrities' faces. They looked fantastic. I was just always like, it looks good. And then I just was like, I don't want to do this. It's a career. And that was not my career choice. Oh, in college, I bought some fine china. My aunt had a china set that looked just like it. And in my mind, I was planning for the future. I'm like, when I graduate and buy a house, I'm already gonna have some fine china. Had like your mama's china, real fine bone. That shit sat in a box for 5 years because I was in college when I ordered it. But I'm like, when I graduate college and I buy my house, I'm gonna have china to put in my china closet. I've never owned a house. I've never owned a china closet. And it had like the silver ring around the edges, not silver, but the little gold plated around the edges. And I remember this girl was staying with me when she first started working at the newspaper I was working at. And she put that shit in the microwave and it blew up. And I was just like, oh my God, this is my fine china. That's one of those impulse things that I did that seemed like a good idea at the time. What else did I do? Oh, I got married. That was an impulsive thing. No, it wasn't impulsive. It was just a bad decision. It wasn't the best decision, let's put it that way. I want to try that. I want to try everything. I want to do everything. Especially if I think it'll support me. It'll make me some more money. I'm not money hungry. I always feel like I live in lack. I don't like that. I'm going to be honest with you. I live in a lack mentality. I'm trying to get rid of it. I live in fear. I have a lot of fear around finances because I have always struggled my whole life, my whole adult life with finances. Because my first career didn't pay enough to well, first of all, I had no money literacy coming out of my teenage years, none whatsoever. I assumed that just because everybody else goes to college, they get a job, they pay a mortgage. I thought that's just like 1 + 1 is 2. I thought it just naturally happened that way. So I went into my adulthood thinking that things just happen. You get a job, you make money, you have enough money to pay your bills, pay your rent, your mortgage, your car, whatever. I was so overextended because I'm like, well, shoot, I got a paycheck. I'm making money. Why is this paycheck? Why do I not ever have money? Because I had more bills than I had money. Anyway, still that way. These are things that I still struggle with, but I try to stay out of jobs now where this becomes an issue. My inconsistent performance with anything that requires a lot of detail. What I hate about that is that I have talked myself out of opportunities because I can see down the road enough that this is going to require a lot of detail, and then they're going to see that I'm not good at it, and then they're going to think I'm dumb. I'll give you a specific example. When I started working for TMZ back in 2012, I was hired to be a tour host, fancy word for tour guide, a rolling show host, whatever, a remote show host, tour guide on the TMZ tours. The best thing about that job, it was mostly a fun job. It did not require a lot of attention to detail. It incorporated everything that I'm good at, which is entertaining live audiences. And then I was on the show as well. And then I got to be mobile and moving around every day. I was approached by my immediate supervisor. Hey, Stace, if you want to, work in the office and be a PA, do some PA work, it's totally available to, keep money coming in. I knew I know myself. And I'm like, if I take this PA job and I mess up somebody's sandwich order, if I get Harvey's sandwich order wrong, it's going to require a lot of detail-oriented stuff, and they had a very everything. The PAs were all pretty tolerant, very exacting. I will get fired. I won't just get fired from being a PA. I'll get fired from a job they actually hired me to do that I'm good at. That was my fear, and I didn't want to look stupid or dumb or like inept. I didn't want them to think poorly of me. So I just told him, I said, you know what, me and office equipment, I can just look at them and copy machine, things blow up. And he was like, okay. I talked myself out of every opportunity that came up that would have allowed me to move up. I wanted to become a comedy writer there, but nobody was ever considering me ever again for that because I talked myself of actually working in the building all day because they're like, oh, you said you're not good at, computers and stuff. And I'm just like, I can write. Funny, that's my jam. So that's the thing. I've talked myself, I know, out of many opportunities out of fear, but the fear was founded because anything that involved a lot of attention to detail, I struggled really hard at it. Oh, let's see. Chronic tardiness. That's an ADHD thing. It struggles so hard. Disorganization. Oh, joy seeking. Chronic joy seeking. Just doing jobs that are fun. Accepting jobs that are fun. Not necessarily always accepting jobs that are fun because I've had a lot of unfun jobs, but whenever anyone has asked me, hey Stacey, weren't you a driving school instructor when you first moved out here to LA? Yeah, I did that job because my ex needed I had sponsoring him because he wasn't like American. How was that job? It wasn't fun. You worked at TMZ, how was it? That was fun. I never thought about it until after I got re-diagnosed. I've always described any job I've ever had that was fun or that wasn't fun. Procrastination, yeah, that's something I've gotten better on though, much better. That's just, but before, before BT, all right. Starting projects but not finishing them, that I'm better at that now, a lot better at that now. But yeah, that was just a way of life before. Getting off task, that's still a challenge. Trouble following instructions. If you're telling me instructions, it's an issue because pills don't fix ADHD, doesn't cure it, but if you're telling me instructions on how to do something, it's like, you need to repeat that. And I'm talking about what life was like every single day of my life prior to getting treatment, okay? These things just multiply them by 10. Following instructions, like, you didn't do that the right way. Oh, failure to plan ahead, I already talked about that. I like, the future, whatever. Everything was a crisis. Everything was a crisis. And if it wasn't a crisis, I made it a crisis. I used to live in a constant state of crisis before treating my ADHD. Constant state of crisis. Oh gosh, working so hard and not having the results to show for my hard work. Just perfectionism. I didn't know that's what it was at the time, but BT before treatment, just working so hard, just harder than everybody else around me for the same or not even as good of results as they had. I was a server at a restaurant in Midtown in New York City. We had mise en bleu. We had to set the table a certain way. I hated that part. No matter how I set the table, somebody would always come behind me and have something to say about the way I set the table. And I would look at somebody else's table and I'd look at my table and I'm like, I don't see the difference. It's because I couldn't see details. It's like, you just don't need to be this direct. What it's like to me, that was like, really? That little half inch makes a difference? But that's the thing. The devil's in the details. Gosh, I hate hearing that. But that was the thing. I would get into trouble for things like that. Things that to me were just like, but they would look at it and go, these tables don't look alike. And I'm like, yeah, they do. The napkin's right here. The fork is here. And they're like, it's the positioning. And I'm just like, overcompensating. Completely tied to this. I would be working so hard for results that were less than optimal. And then I would be overcompensating so much that I wouldn't even finish my side work. That is just quick cliff notes of what it's like to have ADHD on paper. What is it like emotionally to have ADHD? I can't say you, I got to a point where I couldn't even trust myself to make good decisions. I didn't trust my opinions. I didn't trust the way I did things because it was always wrong to somebody else, It's like, the fork and the knife are on the table. And when you don't trust yourself, you get the feeling like you can't take care of yourself, which goes back to the first thing I said, that I started feeling like I'm just one of those people that needs to be taken care of. Of course, I've learned in the last few years, boy, all of that was really wrong thinking, so wrong. But your self-confidence is just gone. You know, you have hardly any self-esteem left because nothing you do is right. Nothing is just not good enough, you know, because the things that other people do so easily are so hard for me. So hard for me. Yet some of the things that I do easily are so hard for them. But this is not that vlog. I always had this feeling that, and this was only in the last, you know, right before I started getting my treatment, that I just needed somebody to tell me what to do. You know, just tell me what to do. I don't want to like try to keep figuring it out anymore. You know, I can't trust myself. I don't know how to take care of it. Just tell me what to do and I'll do that. You know, like I needed instructions. I needed directions. I needed direction. Just tell me what to do. Don't give me too many choices. Just tell me what to do. Ayanla, please fix my life. I was always looking for somebody to fix my life. Always somebody outside of myself. Something outside of myself to fix me. And only the diagnosis could fix me. Just always feeling wrong-headed in the world. Being told that the way I thought was wrong by my own ex-husband, but we won't talk about that. Oh, and a friend of mine, but she was an asshole. Just never feeling like I was reaching my full potential. You know, I'm pretty sure I've talked about some of these things in a previous video that I made a couple of years ago. But the answer to the question of what is it like to have ADHD, it feels like you are never in control of your life consistently. Sometimes you feel like, oh wow, man, I got this thing, because we have so many successes, so many hard things that we are interested in or skilled at or gifted at. We are so good at those things, and in those moments when it's working, you know, when the things that when those things are in alignment with your skills, yes, you're like, yes, man, I got life figured out. I'm doing life, man. I'm making money. But then there was always that thought in the back of my head, how long is this gonna last? Just, you know, so yeah, just never feeling like anything is going to last, anything good is gonna last, because you're waiting for the shoe to drop, the other shoe to drop, you know, you're waiting for something to fall apart and just make the whole house of cards crumble, because you faked it for so long, and you've even faked it up to that point of success. And it's like, I know I don't know enough, somebody knows more than me, you know, and that's a hard way to live. It sucks thinking everybody else knows better than you. And it's like, dang, Stacey, how have you lived all these years on your independent? I've been very independent my whole life. That's the funny thing. That's funny. I am a weird success story. I am the weirdest success and cautionary tale at the same time. Like, for instance, right now I have like $0 in any of my checking accounts, and I know that any second now that's going to turn around because money just falls out of the sky on me. No, because doggone it, I'm making a go at this channel. I'm making a go at being an entrepreneur. COVID gave me the freedom, the privilege of time to do that, to think about what I really want to do with my life. And I know the purpose of my life is to serve other people. And so far, I didn't get into this thinking I'm gonna make this a living. But because none of my jobs have come back, it's like, well, just because I do comedy, just because I'm funny, you know, I feel like I'm doing it more for me than I was for my audience. But this feels like I'm doing it for the audience. This is me giving. This is not for validation anymore. This isn't to make people laugh so I feel good about myself anymore. This is, I have something of value to share with people. You know, by my successes, my failures, my treatment, my just figuring it out still, you know. Sometimes you have to just go back to the drawing board when things don't work anymore, and that happens. So anyway, what's it like to have ADHD? It's amazing, and it sucks. And when you're unaware of what's going on with you, it sucks bad when it sucks because you just don't feel like you even deserve to breathe. Like you feel like you're taking up somebody else's air. And when it's going well, you don't know why it's going well. You're just like, oh, I hope this lasts. I don't even know the formula to why this is working. That's why everybody who thinks they have ADHD should get a proper diagnosis. Or if somebody is watching this because you're like, what's it like to have ADHD? I wonder if I have it. Your life will be 180 degrees in the opposite direction in a good way if you commit to getting treatment. And that's all I have to say about that.
Masking in a broad sense is the act of hiding one's true feelings or personality, typically in order to fit in. Masking how we really feel or what our preferences really are is something we all learn to do as children. We pretend that we're happy when we're actually sad, that we're confident when we're actually nervous, that we like something maybe more than we actually like it so that we can fit in with the group we're hanging out with. And pretty much everyone does this sometimes. But for ADHD and autistic brains, fitting in often requires an additional type of masking. For us, masking, verb, is the act of hiding our neurodivergence. And unlike emotions, the way our brains naturally work isn't something that comes and goes. Sometimes we're sad and occasionally we have to pretend that we're not. But it's not like sometimes we're neurodivergent and occasionally we have to pretend we're not. We're always neurodivergent and we often have to pretend that we're not. According to one of the brains, masking is having to watch every single thing that might make me seem not normal and then fix it, having to bottle it up. We mask by making a conscious effort to behave in ways that are neurotypical, like sitting still or making eye contact, or by suppressing behaviors that are common in those of us who are neurodivergent, like stimming, fidgeting, speaking quickly, interrupting while someone is talking, or sitting very strangely in a chair. Why do we do this? We mask to conform to social pressures, to avoid rejection or bullying, and as part of impression management. We're often corrected and even punished for our weird behaviors growing up, and so we learn to suppress them. This kind of social camouflaging can be beneficial. It can help us achieve our goals, like getting a job, or help us establish relationships, especially with people who aren't neurodivergent. In the short term, it can seem to keep us safe. But it turns out the kind of masking that ADHD and autistic brains are often asked to do comes at a cost, especially long term. First, it's distracting. It can be hard to focus on what we're trying to do or trying to learn when we're also having to actively monitor sitting still and making eye contact and responding when it's appropriate to respond. It takes up working memory slots, which we already tend to have fewer of, so there's less of a chance of us actually retaining the information we're being given. It can make it so we don't get the level of support we actually need because it doesn't seem like we need it. This can lead to a delay in diagnosis or misdiagnosis, or more difficulty in getting the level of support we need after diagnosis. It can make it hard for people to believe that we're struggling. Intentionally masking is not the only thing that can hide our struggles, but it definitely contributes. Masking constantly is exhausting, and long-term, it can potentially lead to burnout. It can set false expectations or expectations that we can't consistently meet, which can sometimes make people angry with us, and us angry or embarrassed with ourselves when our mask inevitably starts to slip. It's also lonely. It affects our sense of self and our connection to others if we're constantly having to hide fundamental aspects of who we are. And it's anxiety inducing because a lot of the weird things we do, our brains are having us do for a reason. They're normal for our brains. They're coping and self-regulation mechanisms to help us focus or relieve anxiety, and not being able to do them for an extended period of time is not good for us. And no matter how much we practice that, no matter how long we force ourselves to sit still in meetings to pretend to be neurotypical, we're not going to be. And the world is starting to recognize these differences for what they are. Differences, not deficits or flaws. I'm excited to see this shift in perception. As people start to accept and understand neurodiversity, routinely see unmasked neurodivergent behaviors, and have these behaviors normalized, hopefully we'll feel more comfortable and safe taking off our masks. I want to make this clear though, taking off our masks does not mean that we are absolved of any consequences. We still live in a society with other people, and our actions and behaviors affect others. I shouldn't have to mask doesn't mean I can be a jerk. I'm not advocating for that. But for behaviors that don't hurt anyone, like rocking, playing with fidget toys in a way that's not distracting to others, sitting weird in your chair at work, I really hope that becomes more normalized, because for us, it is normal.
To see what kind of impact your ADHD or these kinds of problems on the weekends. I usually advise my patients to skip days with the stimulant medications like Adderall and Ritalin. Ideally, this would be on the weekends or vacations for the person who works Monday through Friday. The purpose of this is to slow down the tolerance that you can develop from taking these medications daily. However, for people who have car accidents and are so impaired that they're extremely disorganized, these people usually need to take their medications every day, whether or not they're working. Number 4, the best way to prevent nagging is to follow through. And I know this is easier said than done, and what it means is you have to prioritize doing whatever it takes to get the task completed all the way through. Number 5, when your partner is talking, try to make sure to listen all the way through to the end of their sentence and their thought. That means giving them a chance to stop talking before you comment. If you can't tell if they're done, a moving mouth means they're still talking. An open mouth means they're talking and probably not done with their thought. So let the mouth close and stay closed for at least 10 seconds. And this means you gotta look. You gotta look at them while they're talking to you. You can't be on your phone, you can't be multitasking when someone's talking, because then you're not gonna know whether their mouth is opened or closed. Sometimes it's very hard not to interrupt when you feel like you've heard enough and you want to get your point in before you forget. But don't just blast in with your point. If you have a thought that comes up while you're talking, see if you can make a note of what you want to say, even if it means asking the person to pause to let you write down a quick thought before they continue. The person shouldn't mind pausing if they know they'll be able to finish. Number 6, create time buffers. Often being late is because you underestimate how long things will take, or you just don't think about timing at all. Well, with GPS on our phones, it's easy to see how long a trip should take, but you also have to take into account the amount of time it takes for you to put on your shoes, gather your belongings, and get in the car. Do you usually have to go to the bathroom before you walk out the door? Do you have to spend time looking for your keys? All those things have to be taken into account time-wise. Impatience is a feature of ADD, and often a person with ADD would rather walk into an event late than arrive early and have all this idle time to waste. So if the idea of wasting time being early sounds painful, plan to take something with you to keep you occupied. Catch up on your Instagram feed. Here's an example. If you need to be somewhere at 11 o'clock and your GPS tells you it's a 30-minute drive, you need to have your key in the ignition at 10:25 just to give yourself 5 extra minutes of wiggle room. But then you need to allow for 15 to 20 minutes of looking for your keys and other getting out of the door stuff. So now when we look at the time that you need to stop all activities, you need to stop that stuff by 10:05 to get ready to leave. This is in contrast to you thinking that it only takes you 30 minutes to get there, so at 10:30 you'll start getting ready. You have to add in your time buffer. Now for the partner without ADD, I have 5 tips. The first thing to establish is recognizing that your partner's brain is wired differently. The forgetting and the not paying attention is not intentional. They have a problem and they need your help keeping their lives running smoothly. Number 2, don't get in the cycle of relating to your partner as a parent instead of a partner. No one wants to be talked to like a 3rd grader, except a 3rd grader.
I'm not a 3rd grader.
So you may say, well, if you do what you're supposed to do, then I don't need to speak to you that way. No. You have to remember that they really do want to do things correctly. They just aren't because they don't have all the tools to do it. Number 3, if you need a task completed by a specific time, write it down and be specific. You probably also need to anticipate the consequences for them because remember, the person with ADD also has trouble with planning and foresight. So here's a personal example of what I mean. Suppose I say to my husband, do you want to go to this party on Saturday at 2 o'clock? Now, I know that he may not want to go because that time interferes with his regular gym workout. In fact, he has a class that he's probably not going to want to miss. But he says, of course I want to go, honey. I just want to be with you. So I RSVP yes that we'll be there. Then on Saturday at 11:30, the party's at 2, I see him walking out the door to go to the gym. And I say, well, don't forget we need to leave for the party at 1:30. And he says,
what party?
I say, the one that I asked you about, and you said yes, you were going to go. He says,
I got my class. I can't go to the party.
I get angry because I think you should have thought about that when I asked you. I gave you the opportunity to think that through. You should have told me then that you didn't want to go. Don't do that. A redo of that scenario would be for me to say ahead of time, do you want to go to the party on Saturday at 2? If you go, it means missing your gym class. See, I need to say all of that because he's not thinking about how the party will impact his daily routine. So when I ask, I need to anticipate what his objections may be and put it out there for him so that he can make an informed decision. Number 4, try asking for what you want instead of telling. And you can use please and thank you, but watch the tone and don't beg or imply that you've already asked 50 times and you know he's probably not going to do it. So, for example, if your partner forgets to take out the trash on trash day, remind him or her the night before and maybe even make a note and put it on the door or something to help them remember to take out the trash. But you don't want to say, are you going to take out the trash this time? Reminding your partner that they always mess things up doesn't motivate them to try harder the next time. You have to remember, they unintentionally forget things. Things just slip their minds super easily. Number 5, ask for one thing at a time. Lists can be difficult for people with ADD. Now, of course, there's always the option of getting professional help if things become too difficult, and having a professional, independent person can help you navigate through some of these issues to help strengthen your relationship. They could do it in a similar way that I'm talking now, whereas now I'm talking generically, but your own therapist can help you work with specific issues in your relationship.
I want to return to a structure that got sort of neglected in that discussion, and that is the anterior cingulate. We've split your brain in half here. This is the brain that we've now cut right down the middle, and we're looking deep into the frontal lobe, and we see a structure there. It's right in here, and that's the anterior cingulate. Why would I want to draw attention to this? For a couple of reasons. First of all, I want to tell you that there are 2 parts to this structure that have only recently been discovered in the past decade. George Bush has reviewed all of this literature. By the way, it is not that George Bush. Right? He's a neuroimager at Mass General Hospital. And he has shown that the anterior cingulate is not 1, but 2 separate functional zones. The upper one in red, which I think should have been in blue, as you'll see in a moment, if color is to mean anything. But this upper zone is involved in helping you make decisions in social conflicts, where there are social consequences now and later for what you're about to do. Whenever you face decisions in which there is a competition, a conflict between the events of the now and what's going to happen later if you act this way, the anterior cingulate helps to negotiate that conflict. It buys you time to think about it and then allows you to execute behavior that is in your long-term welfare, not just your short-term welfare. But the blue structure has now been identified as playing a role whenever there is emotional conflict. Whenever there is an emotion elicited by the moment, but the long-term implications of showing that emotion are detrimental to your well-being, this part of the anterior cingulate lights up. Because this is where the frontal lobe is going to suppress the emotional system, and it's going to do it through that zone. We can see that here. This is the opposite hemisphere. So we're looking at the frontal lobe here. We're looking at the anterior cingulate here. We're looking at the very rostral front part of that anterior cingulate here. And we know that this region of the brain projects back into a very old primitive system known as the amygdala and the limbic system at large. The limbic system is the emotional brain. Most species with a brain and spinal cord have this system because this is where emotion comes from, and especially aggression. That is largely an amygdala activity, though it does other things besides that. So what does all of this mean? Well, let us back up. Excuse me. We know that this part of the brain is smaller in people with ADHD. And as you will see on the following diagram, that midline structure does not activate in adults with ADHD, as it does in normal adults who face social or emotional conflicts. The anterior cingulate appears to do nothing. What is that going to do? It is going to leave you prone to not regulating your limbic system. You are going to be very emotionally impulsive. You will be characterized as having low frustration tolerance, impatience, quickness to anger, unable to tolerate waiting, showing your emotions more easily than others, and more raw, unmoderated emotion, hence the term impulsive emotion, and more generally, more easily excitable. Now, if all of that sounds like a mood disorder, it isn't. Mood disorders are where the limbic system is overexpressing abnormal levels of emotion, and individuals have trouble regulating it. That would be bipolar disorder, for instance, which is largely a limbic system disorder. In contrast, ADHD is not a mood disorder. It's a failure to regulate mood disorder. It's a self-regulation of emotion disorder. The emotions the individual is having are quite normal, but most people would have suppressed them, would have inhibited, moderated, self-calmed, self-soothed, and then brought those emotions in line with their longer-term welfare in that situation. That is what the person with ADHD cannot do as well. Inhibit, self-calm, self-soothe, contemplate, and moderate that emotion. So if you're an adult with ADHD, you may find yourself sitting in a business meeting where you have just been insulted. You are much more likely to leap across the table and throttle your supervisor. And you will be fired. Everybody else felt as you felt, thought what you thought, and summarily suppressed it. In their mind, they throttle the supervisor. But it is not released to be expressed through the spinal cord into real behavior and action. And now you understand the difference. The mood is the same. The expression of the mood is not. There is no stopping to self-regulate the emotional state. So we now know that emotional impulsiveness and dysregulation are just as much a part of adult ADHD as are inattention, poor working memory, poor time management, and impulsive decision-making. And now you know why. It is the inability of this anterior cingulate to govern that limbic system so that emotions, once provoked, get expressed without the top-down management that other people would be doing using the frontal lobe to reach in, take hold, and fine-tune the limbic system so that it is more appropriate for social goals. We know that these parts of the brain are 2 to 3 years delayed in their development. If you're here yesterday, you saw this diagram. This is Philip Shaw's fascinating study. This was a multi-site study done between Montreal and Washington, D.C. And we have nearly 225 ADHD and an equal number of control children being followed for 10 years and rescanned 4 times. And now what we can do in this study is to compute the degree of the structural lag. The darker the color, the greater the developmental delay. Now this is brain size, not function, but it does prove the point that the principal delay created by ADHD is in that frontal lobe. And you can see that here from the top-down view of ADHD. These are your frontal structures, and the side view. Now, interesting, there's a back part of the brain here between the occipital, parietal, and temporal lobe, this is an association area, that is also delayed. That was not easily understood by these authors, but it will become evident once we get into the neuropsychology of ADHD as to why that might also be impaired. This is just a mathematical way of showing the same delay. And you can see that the blue line is the ADHD group, and you can see that they are lagging behind the rapid maturation seen in the general population. It's even more evident over here in the prefrontal lobe. This is the part of the brain that matures too early. People with ADHD have this part developing too quickly. This is the primary motor zone. This is where small, discrete behaviors are executed. Hence the restless, hyperactive, off-task, irrelevant motor movements often seen in the young child with ADHD. You've got a hypermature primary motor strip that is ungoverned by an immature frontal cortex, and that gives you your hyperactivity. But the hyperactivity will decline markedly with age, becoming internal in form, a subjective sense of restlessness, but not an outward hyperactivity. The adults that we have seen in our clinics and in our research projects do not climb on furniture. Spouses do not bring them in because they're sliding downstairs in suitcases. We don't see them building ramps in the snow over roadways so that they can jump their sleds across the road. One of my patients tried to do that. Right? But the adult with ADHD commonly reports an inner restlessness, both of thought and activity, where they describe themselves as needing to be busy, to be engaged in multiple activities. The term multitasking has been used for this inappropriately. Multitasking refers to people who can successfully do multiple things at a time. You may have multiple things going on, but they're not getting done. There is also another popular phrase in some of the adult ADHD trade books. Adults with ADHD are good at hyperfocusing. This, too, is mythology. Hyperfocusing is actually perseveration. You are unable to interrupt what you're doing when you should have shifted to doing something else. It is like the child who continues to play the video game long after they should have been getting dressed for school and out to the bus. You want to call that hyperfocusing, that's fine, but that is a classic sign of a frontal lobe injury, and it is perseverative responding. You should have stopped what you're doing, and you didn't. There were other, more important goals to have been accomplished, and you ignored them. This is no gift. It is, in fact, a symptom of this disorder. Hyperfocusing goes with autism. Perseveration goes with ADHD.
ADHD can affect how you think about yourself. What you think about yourself affects how you relate to others and shapes the decisions that you make on a day-to-day basis. There are 18 schemas or core beliefs, that's another way of thinking about it, that have been identified. But I'm going to talk about 3 that have been identified to be common in adults who have ADHD, even if you were never diagnosed as a child. The first schema is feeling defective. You feel inadequate at all levels. This can make you hypersensitive to criticism and rejection. You can also feel insecure around people and always feel in a state of comparing yourself to others. The second schema is a basic sense of failure. Essentially, you feel you haven't met your potential. With this schema, people often feel inept, stupid, lacking talent, or just doomed to be less successful than everyone else. And this can cause you to give up easily on things or not even try because, after all, you're not going to be good at it. The third schema is insufficient self-control. You can't rely on yourself to accomplish the things that you need to. You can't tolerate the frustration that comes with waiting for a desired outcome. Also, through this schema, you avoid certain responsibilities or duties that are uncomfortable, even if it means missing out on something that could advance you. Let's look at how these core beliefs develop and what the downstream effect is. You start having early experiences of failure and underachievement, which can be shaming. Maybe your impulsivity or hyperactivity lead to disciplinary problems. You could have been considered a bad kid because you can't settle down and you're always tearing things up. Your tendency to interrupt people makes people criticize and reject you and maybe even think that you're selfish. Your difficulty staying interested in something makes you look uninvested, unreliable, and flaky. And your poor time management makes you miss opportunities and also makes people angry. Your peers seem to get things right the first time, but for you, you have to do things over and over and still may not get what you want. So imagine years of getting this negative appraisal from others and living with your own negative appraisal because you compare your inner world and life circumstances to what you see around you. This negative appraisal then results in pessimism, self-doubt, low self-esteem, and ineffectiveness. In your head, you say to yourself, I'm incapable, I'm unlovable, I'll never be able to do this, or I'll never get to where I want to be. That leads to maladaptive coping strategies like procrastinating or avoiding things altogether. You engage in more impulsive behavior as you crisis manage instead of preparing and planning. These behaviors create negative emotions of depression, anxiety, guilt, anger, and frustration. Then these coping strategies and negative emotions confirm your core beliefs that you're defective, you're a failure, and you have insufficient self-control. So it's a cycle that perpetuates itself. What do we do about it? One goal is to change your core beliefs about yourself because those beliefs perpetuate the dysfunctional behavior like avoidance and procrastination, which creates more problems for you. A second goal is to change your coping strategies in a way that modifies your schema or core beliefs because now the feedback that you're getting from others and yourself is more positive. Because remember, schema are formed from your experiences and how you respond to the input you get externally. Meaning, losing multiple jobs and being told that you're a screw-up results in one kind of schema. Then remaining in a job and being promoted because you're doing great work forms a different kind of schema. Schema therapy is less than 20 years old and similar to cognitive behavior therapy. However, it's more work identifying and changing your schema than it is to identify distorted thoughts and change them. Schema therapy combines aspects of cognitive behavior and some other styles of therapy as well. It's not something that you can do on a self-help basis. You really need a therapist trained in schema therapy. However, I do think there's value in recognizing these common ways that you can think because of your ADHD and how these beliefs hold you back from progress. The experiences that come with ADHD can really take a hit to your self-esteem. It's like you're limping along emotionally. But some people don't realize they're limping. They just think that this is how they are and that nothing goes well for them because of their inadequacy. But you have to come to terms with the idea that the way you think is based on your experiences, but the conclusions that you draw about what those experiences say about you is not fully accurate. Let me put it a different way. Yes, the deficits that come along with ADHD create problems for you, but it's a disorder that creates negative consequences. You can manage the negative consequences, but you are not the negative consequences. You're separate from them and have the ability to take control and manage them. So that's a different way of looking at how your ADHD has affected you. It's a disorder that has created consequences, but when it affects so many aspects of your life, which it does, it's easy to get lost in the consequences and not see the difference between you and the consequences.
Real quick, I'm out here and I want to tell y'all that it is hard to get medication for mental issues and stuff like that in a black neighborhood. Like, I went to CVS several times and they told me they asked them for the Vyvanse. You know what they said, y'all? Yeah, we don't have that. I was like, what? Y'all don't have? I was like, all right, where I used to live at, I used to be about a half an hour out going east from the city. And Vyvanse was on deck. Vyvanse was on standby. Bupropion, Vyvanse, whatever color you wanted, white and blue, white and orange. Now, of course, you have to get a prescription. But yeah, my mouth is dry with that stuff. But yeah, they just didn't have it. And on top of that, they put me through the rigmarole. They were like, yeah, you gotta get a doctor's note. You gotta get your doctor to transfer this. We gotta get a blood type. We have to get a note of release. And, you know, X, Y, and Z in the third and the square root of 11. I was like, wow, I gotta go through all of these hoops just to go get this medication. No wonder black folks is crazy out here, because nobody can get no mental medication. You know, nah, on the real, like nothing is popping with them. Like, you gotta go through all this. So I gotta drive about 25-30 minutes out to where I used to live to try and cop this medication, y'all. So folks don't want to do it. I'm telling you, black people don't want to look crazy because they ain't going to get it. I think the store's like, look, we ain't got no space for that. We ain't got no space for that stuff on our shelves. They got space for chocolate, for granola bars, for maxi pads, for everything else, but no space for Vyvanse and bupropion, because nobody needs it apparently.
I was very young when I heard the terms ADHD, because someone in my family has it, and I watched him deal with it his whole life. My child was dual diagnosed with high functioning autism and ADHD. I first noticed that there was a difference when he was about 4 or 5 years old, and I would notice that he wouldn't really listen to you when you were calling him. He was hyper focused on the television, and he would stim, or he would do things to kind of keep him normal. Like he'll play with the toy, or he would play with the lights, or be fixated on the lights, and I noticed that wasn't normal. And people think ADHD, I think the first medicine they think of is Ritalin, because that was what was predominantly used when we were younger, we were growing up. And a lot of times the side effects for children didn't eat. They did become zombie-like, but I think technology has improved, medications have improved. There are so many different types of medications for ADHD, and people need to understand that there is a chemical imbalance in their brain, and sometimes children need it.
I've been teaching since January 2018, so a little under 2 years. I have encountered some students that suffer from ADHD in my classroom, outside of my classroom, just in passing in general. I tend to try to know what's going on in school a lot, so I'm quite often in the counselor's office just because I want to know who these kids are. I do believe stereotypes play a part in students being properly diagnosed for having ADHD or not having ADHD based on the fact that stereotypically within the communities there are not a lot of resources available.
My biggest advice that I have is to know your child, love your child regardless. Do not handicap them. While I understand that everybody's situation isn't like mine, I was blessed and fortunate enough that my child, his behaviors aren't extreme. I've seen extreme cases. But you don't have to tell them, oh, you have this disorder, this is why you act that way, because children are very smart and they will manipulate you and take advantage of it. Also, as far as the medicine, I, again, have seen extreme cases where children cannot function, they cannot concentrate, and I've come in contact with people who are just flat out like, oh, I don't believe in medicine, I'm not doing that. And they're hindering them and not helping them. And if you want them to be successful and productive members of the society, you need to do everything you can to give your child that leg up they need, especially our African American kids, because we're already too successful.